Hey everyone, this is Daniel.
Hello everyone, this is Reza Dorrani and welcome to the R&D show.
Awesome. Well, Reza, it's been a month now since our previous R&D shows. It's always good to be back. But how was your week been, man?
Ooh, the week was great. I think a lot going on at work, a lot going on personally as well. So I'm trying to balance out life and looking forward for the summer vacations that's coming up.
Yeah, same here. I've already taken one summer vacation to the beach. That's why I actually got my tan. Looking forward to another vacation over there. But about all of that, the topic for today's show is my personal favorite over here. In fact, one of the links that we're going to post in the chat was about mixed reality, and the initial preview of mixed reality. As funny as that is, came on April 1st on 2020, so it was 2 years ago. And then after that, when it went general availability or GA, the person who announced that hey, this is the Power Apps mixed reality control or components, and they went GA was Anthony. So that just shows the person that we have on this call today announced the general availability. Now granted, there's an amazing team behind that which is going ahead and help boost and really coming out with amazing upgrades. But I, for one, am really excited about the actual this video for itself. And I think, Reza, unless you have anything else to add, let's bring Anthony on the show over here, because he's literally going to steal the show, and I really hope he does that. Anything else
So
to add?
I think just one thing to add around mixed reality is I think when it was introduced early on, it kind of came with the geospatial components as well. And I remember I was a part of the private preview, and I have had conversations with Anthony around both geospatial mixed reality. I remember doing a few videos initially on this as well, and it did pique my interest a lot. And I think over the course of the last 2 years, it has gone leaps and bounds ahead. And honestly, most of the stuff I've seen is through your own videos, Dan. So I know how passionate you are about mixed reality, but yeah, let's straight out bring Anthony on the show. He is Mr. Mixed Reality. So let's welcome Anthony. Anthony, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate being here. Looking forward to share more about mixed reality with you guys.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, before we give you the stage, tell us something about you. Like what brought you into mixed reality? Like, what was your transition to this from where you were to where you are now? Like, maybe just give us a little bit of of your history.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in computer science. I was in CS since my high school. Actually, did a bunch of computer science stuff there. I went to a bit of a technical high school, and so I think CS and gaming lend themselves well to things like mixed reality. My first experience in VR was in like the Microsoft store, actually, in Tyson's Corner Mall, which is in Northern Virginia. And there's something really transformative about like being in VR. Like it really just changes your. It's an amazing experience. And so anyone who hasn't ever been in a VR headset, I highly recommend trying one at least once. And that was so much interest for me that I ended up doing my college undergraduate thesis on how can we use VR gaming to help drive education in elementary schools. And so we actually found that games in general are quite good for education, and VR gaming makes that immersiveness takes it a step further, actually. And so I continued that passion as I went into my career full time at Microsoft. I joined as a dev with an Xbox, and then eventually moved into the HoloLens organizations, the Mixed Reality at Work organization, doing things around like remote assist and HoloLens and stuff like that. And then that was super awesome. I loved my time there. We worked on a bunch of projects, some of which haven't shipped, so I can't talk about them publicly, but a lot of other cool stuff like remote assist that's out there today still. But we also wanted to see how can we take mixed reality, which is kind of seen as this blue sky science fiction concept, and democratize it, bring it to every user, every business user on the planet to kind of empower how they work. And so that's what I think the power of low code mixed reality is right? You don't need to have this like professional team of 3D graphic artists and game design engine game designers, game devs, like all that stuff. Like you can just literally anyone can use mixed reality today to kind of empower their users. And so that was our vision, and I think we're accomplishing that. And I'm going to show you a couple scenarios where you can do that today, actually. But it's really just another tool in the toolkit, right? You think of like your phone's camera, you think of your phone's location sensor, you think of your phone's GPS signal. That's the same thing. But you think of all the device sensors that exist today, and they're all kind of quite plentiful and very readily available for most people. Mixed reality is just that same thing, but with a bit of intelligence on top of the camera. And so it's really just another tool in that tool belt where I hope I can help show you guys how that's true and kind of show some demos that make that possible too.
I think Dan and I are, and the whole audience is extremely excited to see what you have in store for us. And before you begin, I would like to share this with the audience. So it's very interesting. Anthony mentioned about the different components on a mobile device, right? GPS, camera. One thing is there about the Power Platform is the angle of licensing. It plays a big role. And all of those are standard features. And I know 50% people do not know this, but mixed reality, I think if you ask anyone, they'll say, yeah, it is probably premium. People are on the fence. Is it premium? Is it not? So let's hear it from Anthony himself. Are the mixed reality features premium, or are they offered as part of the standard Power Platform licensing scheme?
Yeah, so everything I'll show you today, all the mixed reality stuff we'll see today is part of the standard included with Office 365 licenses. So it's definitely something, once again, that same idea, democratization, right? The less barriers of entry there are, the better. And so looking forward to showing you guys that stuff as well.
Let's go for it.
Excellent. I will share my screen with you guys so we can kind of walk through some content. Mixed reality is one of those things that is definitely better in person. If you spend the time to try yourself to kind of build the application, and we have some sample apps for you as well, the better that goes. It is a bit of one of those things where we won't have perfect frame rate when I show it via the slide deck, but on device it's buttery smooth. It's like 30 to 60 FPS. It feels really nice. And so definitely spend the time if you're even a little interested in how this looks to try yourself. And so, yeah, let's just jump right into the content that we have here. So when we talk about mixed reality, I think it's good to define the term. It is kind of one of those words that, a little buzzwordy, if you will, but certainly a great term that we have. And so when we talk about reality, which is kind of the second word of mixed reality, there's this whole spectrum between the physical world, which is the world that we live in today, that I exist in, you exist in, we all exist in, and the digital world, which is our computer's world, where most people think of like CRM data existing or ERP data existing, but all kind of digital content as that exists as it is today. And so mixed reality covers the spectrum between that. And so we talk about the mixed part of it being that difference where there's like augmented reality, which is where we take the physical world and mix in some stuff from the digital. So like add 3D content overlaid into the physical world. And then virtual reality, which is where we have a virtual world that we can also bring physical stuff into. If you've played, some of the most recent VR games, like tabletop games, you can actually bring your table into VR and kind of play on top of that table. So you have that physical sense there. And so that spectrum from AR to VR, from the digital world and the physical world, that is what mixed reality covers. For our components today, there's lots of different devices across both of these that Microsoft talks to. Like I'm sure you've heard of HoloLens before. We have our Windows mixed reality devices as well. Our components specifically talk to augmented reality components on your phone and on your iPad and on your other kind of AR capable devices, right? So that's kind of what we talk about today. We talk about mixed reality. And so, like I talked about before, it's this idea of how can we use mixed reality as another tool in the tool belt to help solve business problems, right? And so what we're seeing today is folks are kind of increasing sales. They're making estimations easier. They're accelerating audits, and they're improving inspections. All these kind of things. And I'll go into detail and show a demo video for each of these. But there's a lot of the point of this slide is that there's a lot of different scenarios that mixed reality provides value, right? Anywhere where you're kind of you need to understand the space you're in or show something in space to do fit testing or egress testing. That's where mixed reality really comes in and shines, right? And so to do these scenarios, we have a couple of core components. There's the measuring camera that lets you take, volume, area, lengths. We can measure all of those and kind of do the fancy math to figure out when you draw some weird polygon on your ground, what the actual area is. We have the 3D object and view and MR component that lets you see 3D content and images in your space and kind of use that to visualize what a product or something else might look like directly in the physical world and kind of see what you want to see without having to do the expensive cost of physical prototyping and all that stuff. One on your device, of course, which is the view and MR, and then one that can be embedded in your screen, which is the 3D object one. And then the view, shape, and MR, which is the same concept as view and MR, except rather than needing to have a 3D model already prepared, you can just know the dimensions and be like, oh, I know that I have a nightstand that's 2 feet by 1 feet by 2 feet. Let me see what this would look like in my bedroom and see if it fits in that space planning process. And so it does that without 3D content. So it's kind of a more accessible version of that. We also have a new control that I'll share with you kind of at the end here as well that kind of adds these scenarios as well. But there's a new one that we recently released that I'm more than happy to talk about. We'll get to that towards the end as well. So yeah, jumping right into kind of that first scenario of how do we empower salespeople to close to the first scenario around kind of reducing errors and audits. So skipped ahead a little bit there. And so the thing about the MR units is that you can, the measurement control perspective specific, the measuring camera, is that you can measure areas, volumes, and so on. And so for a lot of business processes, you have to validate that like something was installed correctly, or that it takes up the right amount of space in a factory floor, or that, you know, if you've ever, for Americans, there's the Americans with Disability Act, that your building is in compliance with ADA standards, right? And so for a lot of these scenarios, it's a pretty cumbersome process to take out a tape measure, to go measure all these things, enter that down, do the math to figure out how much area that takes or how far away it is, right? And that process is even worse if you're doing like ADA compliance in a bathroom, for example, which is where one of our customers does it, right? And so having to take your tape measure and corral on the bathroom floor, measuring the dimensions of the toilet, right? Not particularly fun. But with mixed reality, you just take out your phone and it has a camera. You kind of wiggle it around, and then it'll auto-magically figure out for you how long these things are. And so we can do this kind of audit process you're seeing here. This one in particular is for an AC being in the correct spot for a housing installation. And it will do all the math for you, and you can build business logic on top of that math. So you'll say, hey, this length was like 1.6 meters, and you need to be 1.5 meters. So we validated that's all good there, right? You can do that kind of custom business logic on top. And also what's nice here is that you can capture images, right, as you're going through this mixed reality process. And so usually as a part of the audit process, people want, for audits, like future proof of what you measured and where it looks. And so these images you capture that are associated with each of the different measurements you made can be saved and written back as part of the audit report, which you can also generate automatically, right? You can use Power Apps and Power Effects and Power Automate and make business logic that gives you back all that and more through connectors. So you can take this recording, you can generate a report automatically, you can email that to your supervisor, right? And do that all instantly and magically through the power of low code mixed reality without any kind of specialized coding skills. And so you can see here, we have these different kind of things we were asked to measure. It gives you the dimensions you need to kind of do that auditing process, and has images associated with each of them. Yeah. And so same idea, but now for estimations is the exact same control. So, there's different processes where you want to figure out how big things are, right? We're doing some kind of kitchen renovations at my place. We have to keep measuring how much flooring has to change, how much paint has to be removed off the wall, how much all that stuff has to happen. So this is that same idea, right? Rather than having to take out your tape measure and do math yourself, it's been a while since I've done math, but thankfully my team does math all the time. And so they can do that real quick for us. We can go here, take it out, take out your phone, kind of measure the things you want to measure, and then use that calculated area and that calculated volume if you need to, or that straight up distance, and then do the math. And so in this case, we're showing here, if you wanted to replace the flooring of these two areas, how much would it cost you to do so with different types of flooring? And so it does that automatically. Once again, you can capture the pictures. You can use that stuff to make reports automatically. And it's really nice because you can have this kind of post process where you go say to you're the first person who comes and does the estimation, and they figure out how big things are and how much needs to be replaced. You can send that over to your installation team, who now has pictures of where to go do it, right? So there's no loss of communication between those two things, thanks to these images you captured in mixed reality showcasing exactly where things need to go. But yeah, any questions on those two kind of measurement? Any kind of thoughts quickly before we continue on there?
No specific questions I see in the chat. I think there were some comments that I need this right now, and this feature is cool. And
yeah,
I do have a question though. All of these, how would you frame the accuracy rate of these measurements on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, for sure. If you consider 1 like me, like with a tape measure not doing so well, and then 10 with a string, I guess, and using that as a tape measure, and then 10 being like the new fancy high-end like LiDAR measurement things that are perfectly accurate to like millimeter accuracy, I would say these are somewhere on the 7 to 8 scale. It does depend a little bit on the device you're using and the environment, right? Like mixed reality doesn't work super well in dimly lit rooms. If you have a super old phone that still supports AR, but it's too kind of on the older end, it's a little bit got worse sensors in there. And so we usually find in our kind of end-to-end tests that we're accurate up to a centimeter or so, right? And so we typically don't recommend using these to measure don't do audits on your bolts, right? Like your millimeter bolts, it's probably not going to do too well for that. But for doing things like doorways or ADA audits or so on, that centimeter accuracy is good enough to kind of give you the values you want. Yeah.
And you kind of already answered this, but we'll just go and make sure we record it as well. Is that C. Callahan was saying, is this available to the public now, or do we need to wait for it? Is it free?
Yeah, for sure. There's I think a comment about you need to have this now. Well, thankfully you have it now as part of your Office license, right? If you go into Power Apps today and you go into the studio, there's a mixed reality section in that insert pane, and you can find our components there, as well as under the media tab for the 3D object one. And so you could literally go add this control right now in probably like 5 minutes and get it working. So if you wanted to try right now, you can do that. And so it's available today, and they're all GA as well.
Yeah, since I've tested this from the earlier days, one of the neat things I've noticed is that even when you add more and more features to an existing control, if you've got an app which is say built with the measurement tool and everything in it, it will still function even though you release more. All you got to do is just open up your Power Apps Canvas Studio, and then it will go ahead and have these new features automatically added. You can publish the app back, and it just works. You don't have to do anything magical. You don't have to update any formulas or anything. These new controls automatically update into your app and studio. So yeah, major kudos on that one.
Thank you. It's actually a lot of work to make sure that we have back compatibility. So I'm glad someone recognizes that, because it is sometimes quite painful to make sure that we like programmatically update all apps with certain formulas to keep doing it the right way. So awesome. We'll continue on if there's no other questions in the chat, it sounds like. Okay, sweet. So yeah, just a couple of things that were showed off in those videos that I think are worth highlighting as specific features. So one is this ability to do what we're calling expected measurements. And so as you saw before, and in these audit and estimation scenarios, often there's very specific things you want your people to go measure, right? If it's an ADA audit, there's specific things that they require. For an estimation, right, you want to make sure that you're estimating the right things. And so now, if you're familiar with the old version of the controls, but kind of the new updates we made recently, now you can pass in a set of things you want to measure, and we'll associate photos with those measurements. And you can also change the parameters for each of those expected measurements, right? So let's say you wanted to measure the volume of a desk and the area of a floor and the length of a doorway, right? The length of a doorway like threshold. You can say to do those things. And so we can pass in parameters per expected measurement, which is really nice as well. And the one thing we noticed as well is that lots of people happen to measure things that are box-like in nature, whether that's a rectangle area or a literal box. And so we added this ability to do that a lot faster by locking things to box measurements. And so I'll kind of show you both of those. So this first one is box measurement, right? Rather than you having to figure out and try to get exactly precise there, we just kind of lock it to right angles. And so you will measure a perfect box every time. That'll give you these kind of like perfect bounding box you can use for your measurement stuff. And so that's kind of a nice way of kind of measuring things that are rectangular or box-like in nature. And the one on the right is the kind of expected measurements. This is kind of screenshots in the video we saw earlier. As you can see, we have these are all passed in as parameters to the control, right? You have the AC unit, the width clearance, the depth clearance, and so on. And then we associated images with each of those and different ways of measuring all those, some of their instances, some areas, and so on. And so that's kind of a nice way of enabling and empowering this kind of estimation and audit scenarios. Right? Cool. So moving on to a different component. So we had the kind of measuring camera that we showed off what it does earlier. Now moving on to the kind of view and MR and 3D object controls that we have as well. This is around empowering salespeople, right? So how can we use mixed reality to drive better sales, right? And so what we're seeing from folks that use mixed reality in their sales process is that they're able to have conversations they wouldn't otherwise have. They can close larger deals. They can close deals faster because it just enables this much better way of communicating with people where you can say, hey, rather than here's a picture of my product, like, trust me, it's cool. You can literally go show them what would my product look like in your store, in your shop today, right? Which is a huge, powerful thing to unlock conversations. And so what we're doing here is we're going to actually use the measurement camera to measure out a space and then spatially filter the gallery of products we have available to things that would fit inside of that space, right? So that's a very common conversation you'll have as part of the sales process is like, hey, I think this might be too big for my storefront, right? But now we can show them, hey, we'll measure out exactly the area you want me to take up, and then we'll filter our products to that. So you can use the mixed reality components together to do these kind of beautiful workflows as well. And so we're going to submit these measurements. It'll auto-populate the kind of like dimensional things that we need to filter against. And then it'll filter the gallery accordingly to those dimensions as well. And so this app has other filters as well. It's a pretty typical kind of sales process flow, but you can see those measurements there. It's one of the filters we have now. You can save it all, and then it'll kind of reduce the gallery to the 4 things that'll fit there. And so the first thing I want to show in space is this kind of end cap. This control you're seeing right now that's loading is the view and the 3D object control. So you can like drag, you can zoom in, you can do all the kind of typical interactions you'd expect. So you can have a nice conversation here, even without going into mixed reality with the salesperson being like, hey, look, like these blue cans, those are the best cans in the plant. Let me tell you why, right? You can highlight these points of interest. We have a feature called Annotations. Those two little dots on it, like let you do that as well. And then kind of, I think the powerhouse here is also you can visualize that in mixed reality, right? In your customer space. And so we've had customers literally tell us about deals that would have fallen through if they didn't have mixed reality, because most people kind of overestimate or have kind of like, especially when you're like a big company talking to a kind of mom and pop shop about these concerns about how things will look in their space. But when you can show them and have that conversation, people tend to be able to give much clearer feedback, right? You saying things like, hey, I don't like the blue color for the back end. Can you make that like a slightly more reddish tint as well? Is this going to block lines of sight for my workers as they work on restock shelves? Is this going to ruin these kind of different lines of like egress points that we have? So you can do all that, right? And so you can take pictures as well. And then also, you don't need to have 3D content to do this, right? If you know that you have a shelf, you have a picture of that shelf, and it's like 2 feet by like three couple inches in the back, we'll generate a programmatic volume for you, a virtual volume representation. So you can do this without any 3D content. You can still kind of have those same conversations about length and fit and egress and fit testing, all that stuff. And it just works, right? There's no 3D content here. There's just an image of a bookshelf, right? Like that everyone tends to have. And so you can have these kind of really good conversations even without having kind of specialized 3D content, right? Like I said before, we kind of save all that stuff as images. You can upload that to Sharepoint. You can upload that to Dynamics. You can upload that to Dataverse, right? And those images are really powerful in the post-sales process as well, right? One of the customers we're talking with, they do this for their kind of custom manufacturing process. And so they have this challenge, or they had this challenge where installations would go wrong sometimes, right? They would say, hey, you need to install this certain piece of machinery, 2 feet from the door and 3 feet from the left and 5 feet from the wall, right? And, it's hard as a person to have kind of written instructions of where something should spatially go and to do that right every time. But now they can literally have images from the sales process, from that agreement between the company and the customer of where to install stuff, give that to the installation team, and then they know exactly where it goes, right? Because they can see exactly where it goes, the angle it should be at, the dimensions, all that kind of stuff. And so it kind of really improves the installation success rate. Actually, it's a decrease in error rates and customer complaints, which drives their customer satisfaction quite high as well. And so there's kind of that nice pieces there. And then also what's super cool is because we kind of share a mixed reality rendering engine with the rest of Microsoft, is you can take these models you used in Power Apps, send it as a chat over Teams, and someone in Teams can click on that and see the exact same rendering in their space as well. So you can view the same end cap in Teams, directly embedded in Teams. And so that Babylon engine that we're using as a shared kind of open source Microsoft thing is super powerful for that as well.
So Roma basically summarized it. It's like when she goes to buy furniture, that's what she's going to use. And that is spot on because it's a low-code tool. So
yeah,
awesome.
For sure.
Good one, Roma.
Cool. Continuing on, there's a couple of features that we added that kind of make this better and better for sales and other visualization flows as well. So one is enabling folks to bring 3D content even easier. So we added support for Obj and Stl files. Those are both kind of really common file formats in different spaces. So like STL is big in 3D printing, for example, and Obj is big with like everything. But Matterhorn, as an example, exports scans of your house as OBJ. So you can like do a visualization of your new house using OBJ models in Matterhorn. Matterport, whichever it is. And then there's also this CG Trader 3D model library. CG Trader is like a really big collection of 3D content and other assets. And so now there's a connector, so you can use that directly in Power Apps with your account and sign in with all the kind of niceness of low code and connectors that way to bring in 3D content that way. And then I mentioned this briefly, but we added annotations as well. It's the ability to add kind of points of interest that are locked to a spatial point on your model. So you can see exactly where they are and kind of have conversations around those points of interest as well. And then there's a bunch of things we did to make the placement experience kind of more immersive and delightful, making it easier to move around, adding shadows, which like really ground the model in the space, making it so that if you kind of like turn around and have a conversation and then turn back, you can find your model fast. We have these kind of off-screen indicators, adding a bunch of stuff for like asynchronous download and local caching. We actually updated save data, which is like a Canvas formula to enable support for loading media content offline. So you can save your models on your device locally and then use that as part of your sales tool when you don't have internet connection. We added scaling as well. There's some cool stuff where you can like scale something really small, like a big display stand, see it, move it around, and then make it really big and have that conversation in both at like kind of dollhouse view and at real world scale. You can enable move models vertically, and I'll show a video of that next. And then you can also do model swap as well. So just kind of highlighting those two features before. One is a lift. So for example, if you're selling a pool, pools are in the ground, right? And so you want to have that conversation with the pool in the ground. And so you can move that down. You can also move it up as well. So if you're selling like a clock or a wall-mounted unit or whatever, you can do that as well. Enabling folks to move stuff up and down is kind of a nice way of increasing where you can show this. And one of the nice bits here is you can see we actually hide the parts that go under the ground. We kind of obfuscate them, if you will. As you can see, it kind of hides those bits, which is a nice little piece as well. You can turn that off if you wanted to show it underground anyways, but it's a nice little thing there. And then model swap. So if you've used the controls before, if you wanted to show different models, you had to place one and then exit mixed reality and go back to the Power app and select a different one in your gallery, then re-enter mixed reality and do that over and over again. Now you can pass multiple models to the MR component, the view and MR component, and it'll let you swap them like in context of MR. So it'll place that same model and you can swap it there. For those of folks who are familiar with like CPQ scenarios, configure, price, something, you can do that now, kind of swapping that model, different colors of the same base, if you will, through the MR components as well.
And the one that you got right now, the model swap, that is huge. I mean, for all of us who've actually been building these, Canvas apps with the low-code one, you actually had to kind of get off the model, go to a gallery or something, pick it, and then come back again. Now, while you're actually in the live, mode over there, you can just go and click any of those. I mean, that is usually a huge step up over there. I personally am excited. Maybe I'm just geeking out. I don't know, but it's just since I've been using it for a while that I saw that I was like, oh, that's just saved me so many steps right there. So.
Yeah, for sure. It's a super fun feature that we're happy to have out.
Yeah.
Anthony, may I ask a question? I think I remember while initially I was using these, the biggest challenge I faced was how do I get, or from where do I get the 3D models? I get it now. You've added that feature where I can have a picture and it adds the dimensions around it, like the box or the rectangular shape, which is great. But at the end of the day, I will need a 3D model because that's where the true power of mixed reality comes alive. Now, the question here is that, yes, there is that CG Trader. I remember I went to CG Trader and I was struggling, to try and get the model. The questions I have is, do you have any tips around how can a low code maker with zero experience on creating, and I'm glad someone else also was asking questions around that, someone with zero experience with 3D object creation, file types, they have no experience. Where would you recommend them to start from? That's my first question. And my second question would be around the same lines, which is, once they, how would they make modifications to it if needed?
Yeah, for sure. I think for experimenting with the controls, CG Trader is a good bet. You can download models directly off that and then upload them to Sharepoint or whatever and use them that way. We also have our own kind of GitHub repository with a bunch of sample content, including these birds of paradise plants and trees and desks and warehouse setups and all that stuff as well on GitHub that I can share with you guys as well that can be used directly with the controls. And then for kind of more business use cases, what we see a lot of people do is they have a content house they use, a vendor that does a lot of that customization. And then a couple of folks are exploring different kind of 3D content tools. It's actually fairly, it's still a different skill set, but it's still fairly approachable to learn how to generate simpler 3D content on the fly. There's places like Blender or software like Blender and other kind of software like that, like Maya and so on, that have different price points. Blender is free, for example. That you can use to modify 3D content. And then we have a documentation on how to turn that 3D content in those software and export it into GLB, which is our kind of preferred file format. And so it's certainly I don't want to imply that anyone can open Blender and instantly become a 3D modeling expert. It's certainly a very specialized skill set, but it is approachable, right? It's something you can learn, and there's lots of community documentation stuff around that as well. And so for trying them out, I definitely recommend using our GitHub. And then there's other kind of free 3D content available out there. If you search up GLB free models, I'm sure you'll find a bunch, right? But we also provide a curated set for you in our GitHub that I can share. And then Babylon, which is the rendering engine, they share some of their own 3D content as well. There's lots of kind of people show, and like the 3D printing community has a bunch of those as well in STL format because they're very generous with their content. And so there's lots of places to find content that works if you want to just try it out. But for like, if you have a specialized product you're trying to sell, right, like I would recommend, of course, working with a professional to make that.
Professional to build those models.
Yeah, for sure.
Even the NASA website has 3D models around their space rockets and all. I actually used one of it in a very early video that I did on it. Anthony, one follow-up question, which is kind of a trend that I see in the chat as well, is once I have that model, I can store it in any repository of my choice, SharePoint, SQL, I could store it anywhere, or are there any limitations around that?
Yeah, so any connector that supports images or videos also supports 3D models. So like SharePoint or Azure Blob Storage or Dataverse, or some kind of like the key examples, OneDrive is another one as well. There's some like nuances, right? So for example, if you're using OneDrive, you have to like tag the column in the Excel with like bracket image bracket, and then like it'll like know it's 3D content and like use that correctly in the thing. And we have documentation, of course, on all this, so it's like a lot of docs. But it's anything that's any connector that supports images and videos we support with 3D content as well. And then like I mentioned before, we do a bunch of stuff now with like local caching and offline support. So whenever you load a model into MAR, we save that model locally on device. And so the next time you load it, it'll be really fast. And then also if you wanted to like prepare a catalog of assets to use offline, you can use the save data formulas now with any connector as well to kind of save them up for offline usage as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Cool. Continuing on. So here's another kind of like fun demo. And so we added this thing for visual marker placement, right? So there's a specific marker we'll give you. It'll detect that in the experience, and you can now go place models on top of that that's tracked in real time. And so there's surfaces that phones don't detect super well as surfaces, super shiny countertops that are small as an example of one of those. And so with this kind of visual marker placement, you can support that a lot easier, have those same conversations and kind of enable that kind of sales placement product stuff as well. One of the nice bits here is that it almost enables a little bit of persistence of the model, right? If you taped down that marker, anyone else can pop into mixed reality and see exactly where you placed it. So if you have multiple people in the room, or if you wanted to kind of do that across sessions, right, you now can, because that physicality of the marker is, of course, persistent in real life. Like you have to move the marker in real life. And so you can do that kind of persistent placement as well. And so it's this really nice way of quickly and easily placing content exactly where you want it to go, especially small content on surfaces that don't typically support detection as easily. And there's some fun stuff with it as well. This demo I'll show you here, like it just kind of enables fun scenarios where we've put that visual marker code on top of a automatic robotic cleaner. And so as that moves around, we track that in real time, and you can kind of see that tracking with that as well. So there's kind of fun little things you can do here that just show off kind of the point of this is it shows off the kind of real-time tracking nature, the persistence of that visual marker placement, which is super fun as well. And so I mentioned at the very start that there's a new control release. That control is called Markup in Mixed Reality, Markup in MR. It enables you to paint 3D lines and show arrows in context of the physical world, right? So if you wanted to, I'm sure you're all familiar, your camera, most likely on your phone, has some kind of annotation or markup ability where you can kind of draw lines statically. That's cool, but even better is using mixed reality to draw those lines and arrows in context in 3D space, and have that be persistent and kind of spatially aware, if you will, of exactly where that goes. And so we'll kind of show that here for this specific scenario where we're going to kind of be a technician walking through our kind of electrical board, being like, hey, look, like you need to flip this switch, and then kind of this is the key thing to hold here, right? We can capture images of those spatially aware, those contextually aware things as well. And so it's a really powerful way of enabling kind of contextual conversations with, once again, without any kind of like necessary like ramp up time, right? Like anyone can add this control right now using their standard license. They can use this control to paint 3D lines and mark things up to highlight key information that kind of your frontline workers are working on. And so it's a really nice way of kind of enabling more powerful annotation, more powerful markup in context of the physical world with mixed reality, which is kind of one of the key things that MR does. Any questions on any of the scenarios we've talked about today, which is like the auditing, the estimations, the sales stuff, the inspections, or any other questions about mixed reality and scenarios that we see?
No questions, just a whole bunch of compliments. I had posted this one over here. This is a nice feature. The features have improved a whole lot. Good job, team. And that's something that I've been, telling you. You guys have come a long way. You're constantly leaking. I'm glad that you're actually showing some of them over here as well. So just a whole lot of love coming into your community.
Yeah, for sure. There's a bunch of stuff that is not really cool to demo, which is like, the experience is a lot smoother, right? Like it's higher performance. We've done a bunch of performance optimizations. There's lower rates of like problems happening, right? Like there used to be certain model types where when you loaded it in, some small things would happen that wasn't quite expected, right? We fixed those as well. And so there's been a ton of like underground improvements too, which is actually a ton of the work goes into making those kind of baseline quality improvements. And so there's a lot of that we kind of don't showcase. You showcase in that the control works, right? Works well and smoothly. And so there's a lot of that stuff going on as well. But the new features are, of course, also super exciting to see as well. So glad to, always happy to get the recognition of the great work that the team has done. And I'm super proud of the team for the amazing stuff they've been doing. Sweet. So yeah, like I mentioned before, these are all generally available. Actually, markup is technically in preview, but it's stable. Trust me. So it's generally available. It's cross-platform work. It works on Android and iOS, and some of the stuff works on the web as well. It's got enterprise support, security, all that great stuff you've come to know and love from Microsoft, right? Like it's a part of an enterprise platform suite. It's actually built on open source software. So there's something called Babylon React Native that all of these are built on. Like I mentioned before, that kind of gives us that cross Microsoft power, right? So models that work in Power Apps, work in Teams, they work on Outlook, so they work everywhere, PowerPoint even. That's all rendered using the same kind of Babylon technology stack. One kind of really cool small thing that people maybe don't know is that when you react with emojis in Teams and those little ones that pop up, like the smiley faces that animate and stuff like that, the hearts, the applause even, that's all being rendered with Babylon, actually. So the same technology that renders those fun Teams emojis also renders, the stuff that we use for mixed reality. So it's a very powerful and diverse rendering engine. And also, it's a shared mixed reality platform. So the same stuff you kind of use for mixed reality on your device in Dynamics is the same thing used in Power Platform. So we kind of all work together to build better stuff together, right? So it's a group effort. As Ryan likes to say, it takes a village, right? And so that's what we do for mixed reality as well. And so, yeah, like to that point of what we've been working on, like there's a bunch of stuff here around improvements we've made over time. Things like model swap, model scaling, adding view in 3D into UCI, downloading improvements, offline support, placement improvements, swapping stuff, all that great stuff, right? And so that kind of all exists, and a lot of stuff I showcased to you. There's still stuff in the future as well, things like, making it easier for makers to visualize their stuff. Actually, if you try today the view NMR control in Studio, rather than just getting like a little toast that says like, hey, try this on device, we show you a preview of what your model will look like, and we give you sample output data as well. So you can kind of build apps easier. One of the complaints we got before was that the dev inner loop, if you will, the time it takes from like testing to validation to changing stuff was a little bit slow. So by adding these kind of like sample data and kind of visualization improvements, you can do that faster in Studio, right? And there's some other stuff we have in the future that we're thinking about, like things like point-to-plane and point-to-point measurements and multi-model support, adding more support into UCI, new capabilities, right? So I'd love to hear from you guys, right, as you're trying these controls, as you're using mixed reality. What do you need to do to be successful? What do you need to have to kind of empower your business users to be successful? And so that feedback is critical for us to make sure that we're building the right things. And so we'd love to get your thoughts and feedback. And also, of course, your success stories as well, right? Anytime you kind of use mixed reality successfully, love to see that on social media and kind of directly as well. So feel free to reach out to me whenever. But yeah, that's the content I have for you today.
Awesome. There's Reza and I have been capturing a few good questions that have come in. So, we'll just start putting them up over there. So first one was from, directly from Tracy Madison. Thanks for that. The question was, will there be GPS coordinates be available for anchoring 3D objects?
Yeah. So folks who've been keeping up closely with the kind of like Apple and Google AR, VR scene, there's been a recent announcements in that space around using kind of 3D mapping with geospatial coordinates. Our controls don't currently support that. If you look into like Microsoft Mesh, which is kind of one of our areas in that space, there's some stuff there that's going on, but that isn't, of course, directly integratable in Power Apps today. You can build experiences that are pretty close. Like we built a kind of clone, if you will, or a similar concept to Pokemon Go using Power Apps and the map component and the view NMR component. So you can use the GPS that you get from like location.latitude to location.longitude, along with the map, along with kind of like the view NMR controls, where you can walk around with your map and your phone out. And when you get close to kind of points of interest, you can view NMR that point of interest, kind of like geocaching. But unlike, typical geocaching, we don't preserve the GPS coordinates to change where the model is placed in physical space. So that's not a connection that we have yet. But the idea of like, I'm close to a certain point, I want to see certain content, you can do that today with the map and the view NMR component. And so you can build like Pokemon Go-esque experiences and stuff like that, which is fun.
Reza, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I'll bring out the next one. So this one is around how big can these files be? And I'll add something to this because it's an interesting question. Anthony, you mentioned offline. So I think that kind of ties in with the offline feature set as well, because I know that the Canvas app offline story is not that rich as compared to model-driven apps because of storage limitations. So how big can these files be, or what's the recommendation around how large should they be?
Yeah, so it's not too different from images. You know, you can have an image that is massive with like perfect resolution and like billions of pixels, and it'll be really large, right? And the same is true for models as well, right? Like there's different things that affect the size of a model, including the images that you store for textures on your model. But for example, like as a very simple one, right? Like if you're trying to render a perfect sphere, you could make that literally thousands upon even millions of little little triangles basically to render that as the smoothest sphere you've ever seen. This typically isn't that useful though, right? Like you don't need that degree of fidelity to draw the perfect thing. And so if you ever played like low poly count games, like that's the same idea where they decrease the number of things you're rendering to make it faster, right? And so you can do that, and kind of this the same applies for models, where it's really about what degree of visual fidelity do you need to have the conversations you want to have around the models. And so they can get pretty small. Like all of the stuff on our GitHub is fairly small in size, but it's still fairly high quality because we've balanced those two kind of things around quality and that kind of stuff. And so I would say like you should be aiming for under 100 megabytes per model, depending on what you want to do there. You can go bigger, of course. We support, of course, large models. And in fact, you're actually only limited by the size of your device's available storage when you do the offline stuff, right? So if your phone has like 10 megabytes of space left and you try to download a 1 gigabyte model onto your device, that's going to fail. But if you have like a huge amount of storage left, you can download. We can fill up your entire device storage with save data stuff through Canvas apps, right? And so it's really up to your device's capabilities and also to your how much you want to model stuff. And so we recommend like aiming smaller. And like there's also things where models support effectively a tree hierarchy. So if you mention a keyboard, you could render each key as a separate model, basically. We typically recommend not doing that because your phone, when it tries to draw the model in space, goes through like model by model, like node by node to draw that. And so the less of those that you have, the more you can do it in a single draw call, it's called, the better. Like a bit technical, but basically like simple models, equals smaller models equals faster load times, right? Better performance. And you can control that stuff without having to change the fidelity, right? If you've ever compressed an image, like really good compression software doesn't really change how the image looks to the human eye. It just makes it smaller and more optimized and kind of does much more. It's the same thing with models. It's almost the exact same concept.
Bottom line, what Anthony is saying is that use the KISS technique. Keep it simple. And I have my own rendition of the last word, just silly. Keep it simple, silly. Don't go too deep, too fast. Use the KISS technique.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this one is around placing multiple 3D objects at a time. And I'll be honest here, there was one point where I needed that in one scenario. When I wanted to bring in two different things to look at it together on the wall. I was trying to frame something, let's say in my room. Pretty common scenario.
Yeah, we certainly hear this a lot in like space planning scenarios. You want to like figure out how you want to lay out your entire apartment, for example. You'd want to do multiple models. We don't support this today. We do support model swapping, so switching. So if you have like that gallery of models, you placed a desk and you want to see what a different desk might look like, you can do that in context today. But multiple models is still a thing that we're looking forward to in the future, and it's something we're working towards, but I don't have an exact timeline for you, unfortunately. But it's a well-heard ask. Definitely understand the ask for it, but you can get pretty close with the model swap today and seeing different things kind of not next to each other, but one by one in different spots. And so we're getting closer. There's a lot of stuff that has to change to make that possible, but we're not quite there yet, right? And so we're working towards it.
Okay.
All right. So we've already talked a little bit about the licensing, but we'll just put this out there. Vinay also had just asked, like, what about licensing? Does it have standard and premium features? Vinay, we said that at the beginning, that this is all part of your standard license. So if you've got your M365 licenses with M365 Power Apps, you can start using these controls like right now. Nothing additional is required over there. You just need to get your own 3D models over there. Anthony, you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think you hit it well. Just the one bit around for 3D models specifically, right? You can also use images. So like, don't feel like you need to have high fidelity 3D content to use mixed reality. You can do it with images and depth and a lot of stuff today. And we'll make that possible for you.
Cool. Awesome. All right.
Let's bring this one on. Do we have any templates using measuring tools?
We have templates that like there's a sales blog we released recently about how you can like, improve sales conversion with mixed reality that uses the measuring tool in it and like a bunch of formulas. There's also a MS Learn tutorial on building that same sales application that walks you through how to like use the different parameters on the measuring camera control to do what you want to do for spatial filtering. There's documentation that has like a how-to guide on how to build a app around the measurement tool. And our docs are also pretty comprehensive around things like what are the output properties, what are the input properties, how do you use them, what's the math going on, what does bounding depth mean, like all that kind of stuff, right? And so we fairly comprehensively, we hope, documented stuff. One of the things we want to do in the future is release more of those kind of sample apps that folks can use to kind of see what's going on faster and quicker. And we have one in the works for that estimation video that you saw earlier. Top secret, I guess. You want to share it publicly, but coming soon. And so, we can share those links in the chat, and I'll help make sure those are posted later. But there's lots of good content that we have around building mixed reality applications and power apps with low code easily, because it does get a little tricky with like the different, when we make the controls more complex and feature rich, some of that comes with some complexity, what properties even exist. So we try to make that as straightforward and simple as possible for you guys with kind of good documentation around that. So, and then of course, Daniel has amazing videos showing you how to use it as well if you want to watch those. So he's got great content on using the measurement tool.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so the next one, again, asked by Tracy Madison. Tracy's asked some amazing questions today. Good job on that. You kind of already covered it, but I'll just put it up over there. He says, like how you showed the pool in the ground, could that be stored there via GPS?
Yeah, what you could store is I placed a pool at this latitude, longitude, right? But you couldn't store, okay, now when I jump into mixed reality, show me that exact placement persistently over time, right?
Okay.
Because that would require a service effectively doing that kind of real-time recognition of what is the spatial anchors in this point associated with the GPS coordinate, which is like a lot of processing power that exists as a feature set that Microsoft offers through something called Azure Spatial Anchors, but we don't have integration with that today. And so that's one of the kind of like future thinking things is how do we bring the powerful MR services that Microsoft offers into Power Apps in a low code way? Because that low code element is really important to us, that kind of democratization availability of it. And so surfacing that service capability in a low code way is somewhat challenging. There's a lot of like configuration on the maker side that we have to work around. And so it's a long-term goal for sure. But for today, you could store like, hey, I've placed a pool at this point. And then you'd have to have the end user would have to replace it in that same sphere as well. The way you could store it though with that new feature is that visual marker placement. You can just place that visual marker on the ground and say, hey, it's right here. And then when the user walks up with their GPS, you can say, hey, I know there's this model. I need to go find that visual marker that's in this exact space, and then it'll visualize it on the exact spot, right? And so we can do that today. And so there is little bits like that kind of get you very close, but not quite to, I walk somewhere, open view in MR, and it kind of uses the GPS to figure out exactly where the model is. We don't have that yet.
Cool. Again, yeah, another good one which came from, again, Christoph, was like great show, all on great demos over there.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things whenever I speak and talk about mixed reality is that, the key thing is you can build your app from scratch and add your own mixed reality controls over there and build it however you want. Like you get however data you want. And the data that you get is huge because I've done testing that with even other out-of-the-box tools or the tools that you download from the App Store. It provides amazing mixed reality stuff over there, but it doesn't pull this level of data. For example, the measuring one that Anthony showed over there, it will point where you started the measurement, and it says, okay, if you head in a certain direction, you actually are in a positive direction. So it's even telling you which direction you went the measurements in. That level of detailed information, you don't get that easily available from apps that you download. And then you have that at your own convenience. You use that however you see fit over there. But point being is that metadata, that additional metadata that you get, it's at your disposal. And then you do whatever you want with it. That functionality is not easily available. And if you want to build your own out-of-the-box app using anything outside Power Platform, there's heavy coding involved over there. Power Platform with all these tools is literally low code. That is usually the big point I say is that just step back and think about what all it can do, but how much information it gives you. and it's at your disposal. You take it and you do whatever you want with it.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that connection is really powerful as well. Like there's a lot of modern phones, like Samsung iOS devices, have a built-in measurement tool on their camera, right? This is like a pretty common thing. But if you wanted to use that with like a business application, like you would in Power Apps, you'd have to go manually have the person open that app, scan stuff, go back to Power Apps, type in the result, go back into the measurement app, measure something again, go back, type it in manually, like all that stuff. But with Power Apps and low code, it's just integrated, right? You can write the business logic on top of it. You can write PowerFX. And so you can just use that today, and it's like integrated into the system, which we think makes it way more powerful, way more friendly to use. And so I think that's that big piece as well, is that kind of end-to-end integration and app building that you get with Power Apps, which is super nice.
All right, Anthony, you said that you had the link for the GitHub.
Yeah, let me pull it up. I'll post that
in the chat, and we'll put it in the conversation over here.
Maybe Dan, you can add it as a pinned comment on this video once it goes live as well. So
okay. Yeah, I'll put that in.
Yeah, the name is from our back in the day when we were still top secret and we wanted to share content with people anyway. So the GitHub name hasn't changed from experimental PCF control assets, but it's a repository of 3D content that we've provided for folks to use and try stuff out.
Well, I think that has covered all the questions. I do not see any other specific question that we've missed. Dan has the link in the chat as well. So go ahead, try those out. Try out mixed reality. See how it can come in use in your business scenarios. And of course, give feedback. Give feedback to Anthony. Dan's making a lot of content around mixed reality. I saw some folks commenting around we need more videos. I think Dan has done plenty on it, and I'm sure he's planning a lot more on it as well. So looking forward to seeing the future of this. I can already see the growth in the last 2 years. I did use it a year ago, so I can see how many things have progressed since, like all those cool features that you demonstrated today, Anthony. So thank you so much for coming on the show and demonstrating all the latest and greatest around mixed reality.
Yeah, for sure. And we're always here to help, right? Like feel free to reach out to me directly or through kind of the Power Apps forums or any of the customer support channels that we have out there. We're happy to help kind of make if there's a scenario that you want to use mixed reality for that's kind of blocked by a feature missing or whatever, we're always happy to talk about that and how we can make sure your people are successful today. And so feel free to reach out. And then, yeah, thank you again for having me on the show. It's been super awesome. I really appreciate bringing me on and having the opportunity to talk about mixed reality today. If we wanted to, I don't know if there's time left to, I can always, of course, show like a quick demo of how to make a mixed reality app right now, but we can always, of course, Daniel has a bunch of those videos anyway, so you can just look that up afterwards. But happy to do whatever works for you guys.
I'll let Dan run this one.
I mean, we've got 8 minutes.
Yeah, let's try it.
Okay, we can 8 minutes. I didn't prepare this super well, so apologies if you watch me use PowerFX and type the wrong command real fast.
Those are the best one, Anthony.
Hopefully we'll get there together at some point today, in the next 8 minutes, of course. So
for the folks who are hanging on to the call, check this out. Last 8 minutes, and we're getting a live demo on the fly. So this is a good example of how quickly you can build something with mixed reality as well. So let's go for it, Anthony. We're putting you on the spot.
Yeah, for sure. So again, the dream is that kind of democratization, making it easy. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is the Power Apps Studio. It's where you go to design and build applications in Power Apps. We have a SharePoint list here that has kind of a couple of models added as attachments, right? So we kind of use that attachment field in SharePoint. And then we have a GitHub, which is where all those models, we kind of downloaded them and kind of uploaded them into that, right? So what we're going to do first is add a data connection to our SharePoint list. So we want to bring in that data, right? So one of the great things about Power Apps thing I love the most, besides mixed reality, of course, is the connector system that we have available. It's just a super nice way of kind of bringing in data without having to write all the authentication stuff, all the service calls, all the API stuff that used to exist back in the day when you had to write apps with pro code. And so we brought in that SharePoint list, the exact thing we shared earlier. We're going to add a vertical gallery in, which is just a way of showing multiple things, attach that to our SharePoint list. And so now we have that kind of nice thumbnail set and models there that we have available. So not all of them have models. You can see this is kind of our test SharePoint as well. So apologies for that, but you can see our kind of nice set of models here. And then under media, I'll use the new version. Under media over here, we have the 3D object control. We're just going to pop that right in and then use it over here. And we're going to connect that to our gallery. So we have the source property, which is what determines what the model is. You can see actually using our GitHub link here. So we can change this, for example, to like tall_plant. that is another model that we have available on our GitHub. You can kind of interact with it, zoom in, zoom out, all that great stuff. And so there's all these models you can use here. We could do like, what's a fun one? We could do that Birds of Paradise we saw earlier. That's too many letters, actually. We'll do Bookshelf Modern because it's less words to type into here. We could change this to bookshelf_modern. Right? It'll also kind of upload into that. And so we're going to actually tell that to use the gallery instead. So we're going to put this as gallery1 dot selected. So that takes the item you have selected in the gallery. Then we're going to use the attachments field. Attach has 2 T's. And so attachments is actually a table. So we need the first of those attachments. So we're going to put that in brackets there. And we need the value of that attachment, which is effectively the file. And so now it'll download from this, and we can go select different ones, and it'll show that one instead. And so that's kind of a nice way of connecting that. And so the next part is the mixed reality bit, right? It's just as easy. So it's over here to mixed reality. Then we'll add the view and MR control. And so this is like any other button. You can customize it. I'm going to make it just the icon and then make it kind of smallish in the corner here. So it looks like it's part of the control a little bit. You can change the color. You can change the dimensions. You can enable shadows. You can add multiple models. You can do all the stuff we talked about before. But just to make it real simple, we're just going to show the model here. And so we're going to make this the view in 3D control dot source. And so now they share the same source. So the model you see here is the model we're going to use here. Like I mentioned before, we actually added the ability to use something called Studio Preview. And so when you click this now, it'll show you what your model will look like in that space. But of course, to do this against your camera feed in your mixed reality, you'd have to use mixed reality device, which Windows aren't. And so we can have that nice way to debug what we're doing here, right? And so that control has output properties called photos. So you could add like a second gallery that has those photos on it. And then, yeah, so that's kind of building a 3D app real quick. It was really just that easy to build mixed reality in your application today.
Wow, this is a round of applause, man. It really is. I'm clapping over here. That was amazing. I mean, Callahan, again, so straightforward to use these 3D images. Love it. Beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. And then measurement's not all that different. So I'm going to add a new screen real quick and then add the measurement control. And so we can't do anything with this, of course, in Windows in the studio because it's, of course, on a mixed reality capable device. But we do provide sample data. So if we add a data table in here, the main output property is on something called measurement. So if we do measure NMR dot measurements, right, that'll give us a nice little table that we can, of course, add to our field here. And so we can get things like the area, the bounding width, the height, the label, the length, all that stuff, volume. And so however you measure it, we could give that to you, right? And so we have that sample data available for you. So you can see kind of all the different stuff in there. And so if you actually use this for real, you can pass in like your expected measurements using the expected measurements dropdown. And then you could kind of use this to see what you've measured and use that data and that output in your logical processes. You could be like, oh, hey, like is the height enough or is the length enough or whatever. And so it's the same idea, very simple, very quick to use, kind of using mixed reality quick like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and the audience was keeping time, so you were done in 4 minutes.
Nice. I'm glad my demo skills have not gotten rusty. So
awesome.
I think this just shows how simple it is to create something in such a short span of time. And I get it. You've done it so many times before. For you, it was a breeze. But even for someone who's starting off new with those models, and I don't think anyone needs the link as well, right? I just add that component and it has the link to the GitHub repo anyway. So I was thinking of putting the link. Now I won't because I know how to get to it. So thank you.
Yeah, and then of course we also have the MS tutorial that walks you through building a comprehensive like sales app as well. Then the blog that I shared, Daniel, I don't know if you shared that in the chat earlier. It's the first message I sent. That kind of has a sample app as well. So that same exact video we saw, that sales app, you can just directly import that into your studio and you can try out that full app as well. That has all the assets pre-configured for you as well. So really nice way of kind of a hard-coded collection of GitHub assets. So yeah.
Cool. No, this is awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I don't have anything else to add. Just again, great comments and compliments coming in. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining our show. And I know you represent an amazing team overall. So when we thank you, we are thanking the entire team as a whole for always adding all these neat features and functionalities. I'm sure we've got a whole bunch of people excited. All the people who come and watch these videos also are going to start playing with it. And then you also give a little icing on the cake by actually showing them how to build it as well. So I don't have anything else to add. Reza, you?
Oh, I think it's all awesome stuff. Thank you once again to Anthony. I'll add one thing. I think this is the first time we are ending our show bang on time.
Bang on time.
Thank you, Anthony.
That's
Of
thanks to
course.
Anthony. He's very punctual.
Get used to keeping track of time when you have back-to-back meetings all day. So can't go too many times.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you again for having me. Really appreciate it. And always great to talk to you guys and see you guys again.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye.
Awesome. Bye-bye.